What's a clear sign that someone was raised well? I work in a grocery store. Properly raised children wait their turn. They don't expect to be looked at or fawned over just because they exist. They don't feel entitled to get everything they want exactly when they want it. Adults who weren't raised that way act worse in public than well-behaved 3-year-olds.
I get what you're saying. It's interesting how some adults can be more demanding than kids. I've seen it too at stores. Some people just don't seem to understand basic patience. They want everything fast and get upset if they have to wait. It makes you appreciate those who just handle things quietly. It says a lot about how they were raised.
A more subtle one, but very tied to good education. They try to understand the other side of the argument. When they don't just say, well, he does that because he's a moron, but instead say, well, if he thinks that and that, I can see why he would do that, even if I wouldn't. It's even double nice, because it's the kind of people with whom you can actually argue. They'll try to explain their argument, but won't dismiss yours, and will respect your opinion enough to not try to convince you at all costs.
That's a solid story. It's refreshing when people can see different perspectives without immediately shutting down. I have a friend like that. We can go back and forth on topics, and even if we disagree, it never gets heated. They just listen, think it through, and reply respectfully. It's nice to have those conversations where you can share your views without feeling attacked. Makes for a better discussion.
Calm, confident, willing to learn, willing to get stuck in. Doesn't have much an ego, can stand out but doesn't strive to do so. Can argue without being insulting, can concede points but also defend them. Has independence and critical thinking skills. I've seen people that lack these skills and then met their parents. Really lets you see why someone could be a mess with no self-confidence and wildly emotional at times.
I've had a friend like that. Always calm and composed, even in tough situations. They weren't the loudest in the room, but their thoughts were solid. We'd have deep discussions, and they could listen just as well as they spoke. It made me realize how much upbringing can shape someone. Their parents were different, maybe too controlling. It's a reminder that confidence and independence come from the right support.
Kids who say please and thank you. It's music to my ears. I brought my 3-year-old nephew a new toy yesterday. He was so happy. He looked up at me and said, "Thank you, Auntie Danny." This kid is 3. He said thank you without even being prompted. There's honestly no excuse for a child to be impolite. There's a big difference between being a shy person and being a rude person. Parents need to be familiar with this difference and stop making excuses for rude kids. The same applies to adults too. I work in a place with so many clever engineers. Honestly, they can put together so many wires and such complex machinery, yet they don't know how to say thank you when you hold a door open for them.
It's nice when kids show gratitude, like your nephew. A simple thank you goes a long way. It reflects good parenting. Adults should get a clue too. I've seen it too often. People can be smart at their jobs but clueless in social situations. It's not hard to acknowledge someone's kindness. Just a little courtesy can change the vibe in any interaction. It's about respect, really.
They chew with their mouth closed and don't make gnarly eating sounds. They are compassionate to those who are struggling without being patronizing. E.g., they'll just give a homeless person a blanket and a sack lunch without fucking bragging about it to everyone and tallying up all their smarmy karma points.
I remember a friend who always looked out for others quietly. One time, we were walking downtown, and he spotted a homeless guy. Without a second thought, he just handed him a sandwich and kept walking. No fuss, no need to tell anyone about it. It's just how he is, always doing good without making a scene. Makes you think about how simple kindness can be.
Getting up for pregnant or older people in public transit if there aren't any seats left. I thought everybody did this, but I can't tell you how many times I was the only person to offer my seat while an older person who worked all day as a food court janitor can barely stand. It pisses me off how often no one gets up.
It's surprising how often people ignore those in need on public transit. I remember one time I offered my seat to an elderly woman. She looked so grateful. Meanwhile, a bunch of young folks sat by, glued to their phones. Honestly, it makes you question basic respect. Just a little kindness can go a long way. It's not hard to stand up for someone who really needs it.
They're tolerant of others. Growing up, we had a cousin who was very well disciplined when it came to following direction. But she was the most judgmental kid I'd ever seen. She looked down on anyone that she perceived to not be a good Christian. She also made some of the most horrible remarks about fat people. Eventually, we didn't want to hang around her long because she would just passive-aggressively pick apart your flaws. I just remember thinking, her parents must have taught her to act like this.
It's interesting how some people can be strict about rules but still miss the mark on kindness. I remember a classmate who was always the teacher's favorite because she always followed directions. But she had this habit of putting others down, especially those who didn't fit her idea of perfect. It made group projects pretty uncomfortable. You start to realize that discipline doesn't always equal understanding.
Years ago, as a father of a 5th grade boy, volunteered for field day at the end of the school year. Kids were playing kickball. Overweight girl was up to bat. I watched as some of the kids snickered, laughed, and blatantly commented about the girl. Some kids are brutal. Anyway, the ball is rolled to her, and she kicks away. She's running to first, and there's my boy, running next to her, rooting her onto base without a fuck given about what the other kids were doing. I knew then that wifey and I had done something right. Was proud of him that day, and proud of him today. It was a good day.
That's a solid story. It's nice to see kids show kindness when others are being harsh. Your son stepping up like that speaks volumes about his character. It's moments like these that remind you of how you raised them. Definitely something to be proud of. Good to know he stands up for what's right.
I used to be all about being helpful and never mentioning it. Really good quote for it too somewhere. Can't remember quite how it went, but I lived by it for a good 5 years at least. Anyways, after working at a job for a few years, the boss eventually sat me down and told me I wasn't doing enough and I'd disappear at random times and lots of stuff like that. He was basically giving me a warning speech to either improve or get fired. I then had to explain how I disappeared the other day to fix something in the bathroom that broke, and I helped the customer with some heavy boxes in their car and lots of crap like that. His response to me was that I needed to vocalize these types of things. He said they were all great, but if I don't say all of the extra work I put in, he only knows the specific things he tasked me with. As far as he was aware, this other stuff never happened. So from then on, I constantly let everyone know about the extra stuff I was doing. TLDR, being humble nearly got me fired. Mild bragging about my work ethic got me a pay raise.
Sometimes, trying to be humble can backfire. I get where you're coming from. I had a friend who worked hard in silence too. After a while, their boss noticed they were undervalued. It took a similar chat for them to realize they had to highlight their contributions. After that, they didn't shy away from sharing their achievements, and it really paid off in the end. Sometimes you just have to speak up.
This was a big life lesson for me, enough that it made a stain on my brain. I once was chewed out by someone, and I normally would have said fuck you in response because I'm defensive when someone yells at me. But I was tired and I said, you know what, you are right. I did this and I am sorry. This is something I struggle with, and next time I will do that. Their response was so calm and nice that I have used it ever since, even if in my head I'm screaming fuck you.
That's a solid moment to reflect on. It can be tough to hold back when someone is coming at you like that. Instead of a defensive reaction, you chose to own up to your mistake. It's interesting how honesty can change the tone of a situation. It's like you found a better way to handle stuff, even if you still feel that anger inside. It really shows growth.
I just typed something similar to this without seeing that it was said already. People who know how to admit their mistakes without feeling embarrassed about it are wonderful. I sadly know so many people who can't admit they're in the wrong, and it's usually over things which no one gives a rat's ass about. I actually have an example from this morning. One of my coworkers told a client that his shift started at 9, so this lady came in today at 8:55 for some assistance. Coworker wasn't here yet at 9:05, so I texted him saying someone was waiting for his help. His response? LOL. He ended up getting here at 9:10, walked by the lady, and didn't even say sorry. My boss and I confronted him, and he said, "It wasn't an appointment. I told her I started at 9, and she got here literally at 9. Not my fault." And he proceeded to walk away. I hope he gets fired.
It's interesting how some people just can't take responsibility. I remember a time when a friend messed up a group project and just brushed it off. Instead of owning up, he made excuses. It really annoyed everyone. In the end, we had to pull together to fix his mistakes. It's weird how admitting fault is so tough for some. Makes teamwork pretty frustrating. You just want people to own their part.
I was raised both by parents and grandparents. I can tell you that when someone is fearful of punishment and has no reason to trust that telling someone about an issue will result in anything approaching a solution, you learn to figure out on your own. My grandparents would always try to help me figure out how to solve a situation, while parents would often react negatively and wind up making my situation worse. So I had to get over getting defensive, and it was a long time before I recognized different signs from people that indicated which reaction to expect and how to adjust myself to folks I had to report to. It's really difficult when people also won't take an apology or assume there's no solution when things go wrong.
Your experience shows how important it is to navigate different relationships. It sounds like your grandparents played a key role in building your problem-solving skills, while your parents' reactions taught you to be cautious. Learning to read people is tough, especially when trust is fragile. It's a real challenge when you can't just rely on others for support, but it seems like you adapted and figured things out in your own way.
A more obvious point, they don't just drop whatever they're holding on the floor for everybody else to clean up. Last week when I went shopping, I walked past a young couple with 2 kids around age 6 or so who had just received some complimentary popcorn from the store, and one of the kids took a handful of popcorn and just dropped the entire bag on the floor. Then the other kid followed suit. Both of the couple watched them do this, looked up at me, and said, "Kids, you gotta love him," and just kept on walking as if they did nothing wrong.
That's pretty typical, I guess. Parents sometimes just shrug off their kids' messes. I remember a time at a park where a friend's kid spilled juice all over the picnic table, and instead of cleaning it, he just laughed. My friend said something like, "Kids will be kids," and we just ended up mopping it up ourselves. It's strange how some parents choose to ignore it.
My mom always played a game with me that if I could sneak an item in the cart and she didn't notice before checkout, then she'd buy it for me. It kept me quiet in the store, normally led to my mother pretending to overlook one item, and I'd never throw tantrums because she wouldn't get me something. It also was a lot of fun.
That's a clever game your mom had going. It sounds like a nice way to keep you occupied while shopping. Sneaking in an item must have felt like a little victory each time. Plus, it seems to have helped with your behavior in the store. Good times like that can really make shopping more enjoyable and memorable. Simple moments can stick with us over the years.
I used to teach in a pretty urban school, and 2 years ago, I switched to one of the best high schools in the country. The culture shock was real. One of the things that blew me away was that when my new students left the classroom, they all said "thank you" or "have a nice day" on their way out. I just kind of stood there flabbergasted. I couldn't believe how that simple act just made me so happy.
I can relate to that. I used to work in a rough neighborhood too, and now I'm in a more affluent area. The differences are striking. The small gestures like, thank you, do mean a lot. It creates a different atmosphere, a sense of respect. I remember feeling surprised at first, but it's nice to see that kind of appreciation. Makes the job feel a bit more worthwhile, doesn't it?
In elementary school, we had these two awesome PE teachers, a man and a woman. One day, my mom explained to me that the man had been fired because he had shoved a kid against a tree in anger. Didn't sound like him because he was super nice. He had been my older sibling's PE teacher too, and I would see him at the grocery store and my mom always stopped and talked to him, etc. Anyway, the kid who he shoved against the tree was just terrible. Such a jerk and misbehaved. After the incident, he got even worse because he could get away with everything since the teachers were all scared of him. I have a vivid memory of being at PE and waiting in line to play kickball, and he was yelling rude, degrading insults at the female PE teacher, and she just tried to ignore him, which in my day, you really didn't do that as a teacher. You reprimanded kids. I was just so aware of and so angry about this terrible and disrespectful kid having control.
That's a weird situation. It's surprising how things can shift when a teacher loses control like that. I remember a similar vibe back in school. A kid would act out, and it felt like everybody was just waiting to see what the teachers would do. Some kind of unspoken rule emerged where the bad kids got the upper hand, and it made classes pretty tense. You'd think teachers would step up, but sometimes they just didn't.
This makes me feel good. My 5-year-old son just started full-time daycare for the first time in his life. The other day, when I picked him up from the daycare, I asked about his day. I asked if he had made any friends, and he gave an unenthused yes. I asked him what was wrong, and he said, well, the other kids are really naughty. They don't listen to the teachers very good, sick, and they're just naughty. I didn't realize that he noticed other kids' naughtiness, but it makes me feel like his mom and I are doing something right. Smiley face.
It's nice to see kids picking things up. Your son noticing other kids' behavior shows he's aware of norms. I guess that means you and his mom are guiding him well. It can be tough for kids to adjust to new environments. Hopefully, he'll make good friends soon and find his place, even if some kids are a bit wild. It's all a part of growing up and learning social skills.
I agree with this. My roommate's nephew came over to stay for the night, and in the morning, my roommate wasn't up yet, but the nephew was. I asked if he wanted to walk around the park next to our apartment with me, since I was taking the dog. And even though he knew I lived there and knew his uncle, he said he couldn't go because his mom had never met me and probably wouldn't like it.
That's a pretty relatable situation. It's funny how kids can be so cautious, even when the adults know everyone involved. I had a friend once who wouldn't hang out with me unless his parents approved. It feels odd being judged based on their opinions, but I guess that's just how it goes with families. Better safe than sorry, right? Just part of growing up, I suppose.
You are so right about this. That is a very respectful action for a 5-year-old. I have a neighbor who is quite concerned about safety, and her children always ask her before walking up to my front step to visit my cat, riding their bikes, or going in their treehouse. I really appreciate seeing that. Even small children can understand basic premises of respect and caring, and I think that our society has forgotten that with helicopter parenting. You can and should expect this of your children. All too often, parents minimize their child's expression and learning of respect by not trusting that they have learned these seemingly basic lessons and will act on them when they need to. Teach your kids people and let them put their lessons to the test.
It's interesting how kids pick up on respect early. My friends' kids do similar things. They always check in before going anywhere, like it's second nature to them. Their parents really emphasize the importance of being aware and respectful of others. It's a good reminder that even young ones can show consideration. It seems like society could benefit from seeing more of that, instead of just assuming kids will figure it out.
I was out flying RC at a park, and this kid came up to watch. I was okay with that, as it's interesting to watch, so I'm used to being watched. Well, it was a new plane, and it was being tested, and I crashed. Me and my buddy were standing around it, discussing why it may have crashed, and the kid just walks up very close and doesn't say a thing. He then goes to look at the transmitter that I had set on the grass, and I thought he was just curious. Nope, he just picked it up and didn't say a thing. I had to take it from him and then leave. It was incredibly uncomfortable, and I didn't see his parents anywhere. Very weird experience.
That sounds like a strange situation. I get it, you're just trying to enjoy flying and test out the new plane. Having a kid come up and act like that can definitely make things awkward. It's unsettling when kids don't say anything and just take something without asking. I guess you did the right thing by taking the transmitter back. Hopefully, he learned to respect other people's stuff next time.
My mom always taught me as a kid that there was a difference between good argument and bad argument, and always encouraged good argument, even if it was me arguing with her about punishment she gave me, etc. A good argument was basically articulating your feelings without yelling or calling names or being mean, but also having to hear the other person's perspective and not getting upset if they don't agree with you. Man, I have such a wonderful mom. I don't take the time to acknowledge that enough. I owe every good part of who I am to her.
That's a solid lesson from your mom. It's not easy for a lot of people to have those kinds of discussions. Being able to express yourself and really listen to others is important. Sounds like you learned some valuable skills growing up. It's good to take a moment and reflect on how much impact a parent can have on shaping who you are. Acknowledging that is key.
I teach kindergarten and first grade. I have had a recent new wave of kids who really struggle with reading and writing. I ask the parents, and the answer is the same. We've never read to him. How would that help? And he's never held a pencil before. Isn't that your job? Uneasy face. Thank God you had children.
It's kind of wild how some parents don't see the importance of reading early. I remember a friend who started teaching kids the alphabet through simple games. The change was noticeable. Kids started to engage more, and even parents began to join in. It's like sometimes you have to show them the way, rather than just telling them. Makes you appreciate the work teachers do.
Yes, this is a big one. I used to hang out with a group who never did this. Whenever a new person was introduced into the group, say one of the guys got a new girlfriend, everyone would make inside jokes the new person didn't get and even make subtle jokes about her while she was in the room. No one made any small talk or showed interest in the new person, yet they expected newcomers to make themselves part of the group. It's so liberating to be a part of a group where people will actually smile to the newcomers and ask easy questions like, "What do you do?" or "Do you like guacamole?" To show interest and make people feel included. It's like 1 million free adult points.
It's funny how some groups can be so closed off. I remember joining a similar crew once. The jokes flew over my head, and it felt awkward. I didn't really get why they didn't just welcome me. But then I found a different group that was chill and friendly. They actually asked about my interests. Made all the difference in feeling at ease. Just being nice can change everything.
My mom is unpopular at work because all of her coworkers are literally too busy gossiping or doing personal shit to help a customer. I saw it myself when I worked there. Wouldn't be too bad, except it was a government job. I've never seen women 3 times my age bullying each other in a way I stopped seeing in middle school.
It's kind of wild to see adults act that way, especially in a place where you expect professionalism. I guess some environments just breed that kind of drama. Your mom probably feels pretty out of place. It's a shame when the focus should be on the job instead of petty gossip. Makes you appreciate workplaces that keep it more together.
My SO's little brother was an oopsie, and their mom got cancer when he was a toddler. So he's over 10 years younger, and mom would just do whatever it took to shut him up so she can have peace. I really don't blame her, but damn his little brother a little shit. The kid is 13 years old. He came to stay the weekend with us, and he was so ungrateful. I made everyone a huge dinner, and when I got him his food, he said, "Wow, about time." I took his plate until he said sorry and thanked me. It took about 2 hours, and I'm sure I'm a horrible person for doing so in his eyes. That's one of many examples.
Dealing with ungrateful kids can be tough. I remember when a friend's little brother stayed over. He was about the same age and just full of attitude. I made dinner, and he didn't appreciate it at all, acting like I owed him. I took his plate away, just like he did. Eventually, he came around and said sorry. Sometimes, kids just need a little lesson in gratitude.
I taught the kids to be polite with every interaction outside the house, especially at places like the supermarket or in places like McDonald's. I didn't care if it was a no, eye contact / distracted thank you, but no one, not even a 3-year-old, should expect anyone to do things for them without some acknowledgement. When really little, they would get confused and say mixed up things like nuggets. Please you. Everyone understood, because it's not the words, it's the attempt at courtesy that matters. With adults, it's that lack of attempt at manners that can make someone come off as rude / unprofessional / unfriendly, etc.
That's a solid approach. Teaching kids to acknowledge others can make a difference. I remember when I was young, I would mumble thanks too, but the adults always appreciated the effort. It's funny how those small things stick with you. Like, even now I notice when someone doesn't say thank you. It just shows respect. Those basics really go a long way in how people connect with each other.
Preach. As you say, sometimes the best way to learn is to experience the opposite. I was brought up in a children should be seen and not heard household. I had to essentially teach myself how to communicate when I got to college. For the most part, one did an okay job, though the thought of making a phone call still makes me break out in a cold sweat. And I've picked up a lot of other things along the way. I find it interesting that in my current job, an extremely competitive field, when I treat everyone with the same level of kindness / respect, it is very much seen as weakness. You're such a pushover, although I'm not just going along with what others say, but rather I'm trying to understand / see their point of view and weigh up its merits. According to a colleague, you just want everyone to like you. Well, no, I don't care whether or not they like me. I care whether they felt like I was listening.
It's tough growing up in an environment where you're not encouraged to express yourself. I can relate. When I started my first job, I realized that just being nice was often viewed as a weakness. It's strange how kindness can be misinterpreted. I also believe it's more about understanding others than seeking their approval. It's all about finding your own way to communicate and connect, even if it feels risky at times.
In high school, I was playing golf at a really nice country club that a friend of mine family is a part of. I held the door for an old lady, and she was taken aback by it. She said, "Son, you must not be a member, because I haven't had a young gentleman hold the door for me in years." She ended up paying for our meal. I was shocked by the idea of a Texan / somewhat southern country club, and people did hold the door. My grandma would make me get a switch if she heard I didn't.
That's a nice story. It's interesting how little gestures can leave an impression. Holding the door seems simple, but it really adds to someone's day. The old lady's reaction shows how manners can still mean something. And getting your meal paid for must have been a nice surprise. It's funny to think about how different places have different expectations when it comes to politeness. Your grandma's way of teaching respect definitely stuck with you.
My twins gave their Chuck E. Cheese tickets to some smaller kids the other day. The big mouse came out, and threw tickets in the air, and all the kids had to scramble to pick them up. The big kids, mine are 5 years old, all got a bunch while the littles got none. My kid just walked up to the small kids and said, "Here you go. Choke me up." I love when my kids are chill like that.
That's a nice moment. It's cool to see kids share and be kind without really thinking about it. Your twins probably made those smaller kids' day just by being generous. It's good to know they can have fun and look out for others. Moments like that really show the simple things that matter. Just a nice reminder of being considerate.
Holy shit, yes at the latter. Nothing makes me madder than people who do good things for the sole purpose of bragging. I appreciate that they did a good thing. I hope it made someone's day easier, but fuck that smug sense of selfishness. There's the person who'll give cash to a homeless dude and go home and tell everyone they know. Then there's the person who'll give cash to a homeless dude and never tell a soul, because to them, it isn't about the attention. It's about helping someone. That's, in my mind, the definition of a hero.
I get that. I've seen it too. A friend of mine once helped someone in need quietly. He didn't tell anyone, just did it because it felt right. Later, people found out, but he never brought it up himself. It was refreshing to see someone genuinely care without needing recognition. Those kind of actions stick with you, you know? They make a real difference without the need for a spotlight.
What pisses me off the most is when an elderly person gets on the train and the 3 priority seats by the door are full of 20-somethings just looking at their phones. It's fine to sit there even if you don't need a seat, especially if the train is getting full. But if you sit there, you have to be prepared to get up when someone who needs it gets on.
I get that. It's just basic respect. I remember a time when I saw an elderly man struggle to find a place to sit. A couple of younger folks were just glued to their screens, completely ignoring him. You'd think they'd notice someone who actually needs the seat. It's a small act to just be considerate. If you're in one of those priority seats, maybe just keep an eye out for others who might need it more.
I have found it difficult to teach my son how to do things around the house, because oftentimes I am just learning or figuring it out on the fly myself. I can't have him standing there watching me for an hour while I figure out what I am doing, or if I'm trying something to see if it works. I feel I have to instruct him on the proper way to do it while I am executing the proper way, and I usually can't do that.
It sounds like you're in a tough spot. Trying to teach while figuring things out yourself can be frustrating. I get how it feels to want to guide someone but also be learning at the same time. It's like a balancing act. Maybe involving him in the process, even if it's messy, could help. It could turn into a shared learning experience instead of just teaching.
My mother is a teacher's aide in high school and has a high tolerance for disrespect. She just becomes petty and turns it back around on the shitty kids whenever they want something that's a privilege rather than something all students receive. She encouraged me to go into teaching and said lots of kids are jerks, but you're stern and can make them shut up fast. I don't want to be a teacher and have to present myself like Dolores Umbridge.
That sounds like a tough situation. It's interesting how some teachers find ways to handle disrespectful students. Your mom seems to have a solid approach, even if it gets petty at times. I get why you wouldn't want to take that path. Teaching isn't for everyone, especially if you want to avoid the strict vibes. It's good she supports you, but it's also important to find a career that feels right for you.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.